This month, we got Chief Peter Scheets going to share some stuff with us, and he brought his backup with him.
And him. Yeah, that's what I say.
Katie Parker, Detective Parker, told me that she was going to kick it off by doing the chicken dance, but I see that she left. So.
Chicken down.
All right, today we're going to talk to you a little bit about the Hutto Police Department. There was some small changes in the organization, but I wanted to talk to you about the philosophy overall and the direction that we want to move forward. So if I can figure out this thing. All right, I'm going to start off with our mission statement. And this mission statement you see in front of you, if you can read it, is typical of most police departments, and it has to do with the actions that we take in reference to law enforcement. So I'll run through them very briefly. Protection of life and property. When I come up here and talk about the crime trends, I talk about crimes against persons and crimes against property. So those are the two categories that we look at. The second bullet there, preservation of the peace, suppression of disorder, prevention of crime, promotion of traffic safety, apprehension of offenders, recovery of stolen property, and enforcement of city ordinance and state laws. This is pretty typical of law enforcement agencies if you just want to focus on law enforcement. Our vision statement is a little bit broader. We talk about community interaction being a crucial part of our crime fighting philosophy. We make every effort to work with the community to identify and resolve problems that affect crime, fear of crime, disorder, and quality of life issues. The three things I want to highlight here, which I'll talk about in terms of philosophy as we go through the presentation, is community interaction, how we resolve problems, and quality of life as it applies to community safety. As far as community interaction, I have Lieutenant Jones in the back. Very high, Dwayne. I want to highlight his efforts as the manager of our recruiting process. That we recruit people that have a community orientation, that have values, and I think it shows in the way that the officers respond in the community. So my hat's off to you, Dwayne. You've done a great job. He mentioned to me yesterday that something to that effect, that we can train you to be a police officer, but we can't train you to be service-minded and community-oriented. So I think we're doing very well on that front. The other part of this is resolve problems. In typical police departments, when I talk to you about law enforcement and public safety, those are two separate things. Public safety is a broader umbrella, but in terms of law enforcement, most police officers believe that if I arrest somebody, then I've resolved the problem. That's the end of the problem. But as we get into this, I'll show you there's other ways to resolve problems besides putting handcuffs on somebody. All right, here's our work chart. On the left side, you see small units and individuals in blue. Those are the patrol officers. Lieutenant Jones is over the patrol division. He has 4 sergeants. Each sergeant is responsible for a 12-hour shift. And those 4 shifts cover the city 365 days a year, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. On the right side, in red, are the support units. And over there we have the detective division, crime scene unit. We have the school resource officers, which basically are patrol officers patrolling the school campuses. And then we also have our community resource officer, which we will discuss in detail later. She's sitting here in the front row. Officers are in class. This is your chance to wait. I promise I wouldn't make her say anything today. All right, I'm going to start off with a little bit of philosophy here to kind of get at the direction that the department is going to be moving in. I know I've talked to you, some of you before, about who this individual is, Sir Robert Peel. And for those of you who have already talked to about it, I apologize, but I'll briefly summarize. In 1829, Robert Peel established the Metropolitan Police Force at Scotland Yard in London. He was a police reformer, and he was taking the Metropolitan Police and actually all of the police in England and kind of reforming the way that they did business. He was so successful that the people that he hired and put in place in London were called Bobby's Boys or Peeler's Boys, and the name has stuck to this day. So if you go to London or go to England, police officers are referred to as Bobbies, and that's because of the reforms that he put in place. His whole focus was ethical policing, and he came up with 12 principles, and for those who are initiated into the 12 principles are equivalent of the 10 commandments in law enforcement. This is principle number 7, and I think some of you have heard me talk about this before. But his whole focus and his whole gist of what he was saying here is that the police and the public are responsible for law enforcement and public safety, and you can't separate the two. The police are part of the community, not apart from the community. So let me take you back to basic police training 101. This is the crime triangle. Two things I'll highlight here before I discuss it is, one, I made it maroon. That's thank you. And two, I think it's much sexier than the fire triangle. Let me explain this very briefly. There's 3 elements for a crime to occur. You have to have a victim, a location, and an offender. And if we as police or we as a community work on one of those aspects of it, we can actually prevent crime from taking place. So the 3 elements have to be present. And again, addressing any of those elements can eliminate or reduce the opportunity for crime. For a traditional police department, what we do is we respond to a call for service, we go to the location where the crime occurred, we talk to the victim, we take the report, and we hand them a card with the case number. It gets pushed to a detective and then goes up to the Eve County Attorney's Office or the District Attorney's Office, and a warrant's issued. It's very effective, very efficient, very traditional, but it doesn't address the issues that gave rise to the crime in the first place. It's a response to the crime, but doesn't actually address the conditions that gave rise to the crime. Real quick, the RAND study did a corporation on cases and how they were resolved. And that study showed that the majority of the cases were solved by the officers that respond to the scene, collect the initial reports, rather than what we see on TV of the detective doing all the legwork and using all the CSI magic to resolve the case. So I wanted to highlight that here because in Hutto what I see is the officers tend to dig a little bit deeper, do a little bit more legwork on the front end, and as a result we're able to resolve a lot of the offenses that are reported to us. I mentioned at one point here, Officer Julie Cook making an arrest for an individual on public intoxication, and he had the little liquor bottle stoppers in his pocket. She was curious about that and managed to backtrack it to burglary of a restaurant here in town. Just because she could property index those 2 pieces of property, and that would have been the end of it, and there would be no expectation that she would have done anything different. But she dug a little deeper and actually tracked it back and helped resolve a felony offense. Okay, this is an example of the Pareto principle here. The numbers that you see up there are from the U.S. Department of Justice. Pareto was an Italian economist, and he found out, because he was doing his business in Italy, that the wealth and property became aggregated. That there was this magic 10% number that in Italy he found out 10% of the population, owned or had 60–70% of the wealth. And he saw that principle playing out in different areas, in land ownership and a whole bunch of other things. It plays out in law enforcement too. If you look up here, 10% of our offenders are responsible for 55% of the crime, 10% of the victims responsible for 42% of victimization, and 10% of locations are responsible for 60% of the calls for service. I do like to highlight the victim. We really don't have a professional pool of victims out there. We have a group of people that are in a situation and they can't get out of it, and they end up being re-victimized over and over. So if we're going to be effective at resolving the issues that give rise to crime, and we look at those three components of the crime triangle, we should be focusing our effort on those 10% that will have the greatest impact in terms of reducing crime and opportunity for crime. There's 5 ways that you can impact the conditions that give rise to crime. I mentioned that police officers tend to focus on this first one, and for us, eliminating the crime is writing a citation, making an arrest, and basically removing that person from the conditions that they're in. The other ways are reduce the harm from the problem, reduce the number of incidents, improve how we handle the problem, and the 5th one here, which we'll get into in detail, is refer the problem to the proper authorities. When I talk to the public about that, they look at us, look at me, that's kind of silly, you're the police, you are the proper authority. But there are things that we pass the victim or pass off so that the issue can be resolved, but we just don't have the resources to do it as a law enforcement agency. All right, broken windows theory. Theory was introduced in 1982 by James Q. Wilson and George Kelly. These two were economists, and they wrote the article for The Economist magazine. And their theory is basically this, that each community has norms, and if those norms aren't maintained, that as the community goes into decline or decay or disorder, it sends signals to the criminal element, or it sends signals out into the community about what they will tolerate in terms of antisocial or incorrect behavior. So it's under this theory, an ordered and clean environment, one which is maintained, sends a signal that the area is monitored and that criminal behavior will not be tolerated. Conversely, a disordered environment, one which is not maintained, broken windows, graffiti, excessive litter, sends a signal that the area is not monitored and that one can engage in criminal behavior with little risk of detection. I brought at the helm up because I wanted to highlight that when the mayor talks about beautification, or if we do on Arbor Day, we've listed that under quality of life, but it's actually public safety crime reduction. Pictures worth 1,000 words. Here's an example of broken windows theory. If I take us all on an imaginary bus ride and we go to this neighborhood and I ask you, do you feel safe here? The answer is probably going to be yes. If I take you to the other neighborhood on the far right there and ask you, do you feel safe in this neighborhood? The answer is probably going to be no. You know that intuitively. The theory is just highlighting what we kind of sense and what we know by intuition. Territoriality. This is another theory that goes along with broken windows. The University of Champaign-Urbana have done this, a study on this, and I'll not read the slide to you, but just explain that this territoriality is basically the business owners, the homeowners, the residents, the members of the community maintaining the community in such a way that it takes it above, one step above what you see in broken windows. So you can, again, go into neighborhoods and see that, hey, this neighborhood, they've planted flowers, they've got city flags, it's well maintained. It takes that theory to the next higher level and basically sends a signal that, hey, this is a community that really cares about its appearance, cares about what's going on, so that if you go into that community, you know that antisocial or different types of behavior will not be tolerated. Any questions on that? I won't belabor that one. This is just an example of that. Before picture, while there's nothing wrong with this, a criminal might look at it and go, it's not maintained here, and I can get back in behind the bushes and do my nefarious deeds, and no one will see me. And the other picture just shows that the homeowner has taken some interest in the appearance and maintained it, opened up some of the views so it's a little more open, but they call that defensible space. It looks as if the homeowner has taken pride in that space, and that it's defensible from the position of crime. It's visible, it's maintained, and it sends out a clear signal that the person that lives in that house takes pride in it and is willing to call the police if something goes wrong. I always like to use the example there for community standards on if we all got on a bus and went into downtown Austin, what we could do before someone would call 911 and complain on us compared to if you come into Hutto and do the same thing. How long would it take before someone calls you? I pulled this up. I found it a couple days ago. This is Edi Rama. He was the mayor of Tirana, Albania. Albania was a Marxist country. We used to joke that when the Albanians wanted to let their hair down and cut loose, that they would go to Eastern Bloc communist countries because the rules weren't quite as strict up there. So this guy, after the Berlin Wall came down, Soviet Union was dissolved, became mayor. And I don't know if you can see this. This is a TED Talk. He says, "Take back your city with paint." I'll read to you a brief excerpt. Here's what he says. "Make a city beautiful and curb corruption and crime." That Mr. Rama took this deceptively simple path as the mayor of Tirana, Albania, where he instilled pride in his citizens by transforming public spaces with colorful designs. With the projects that put people first, Rama decreased crime and showed his citizens that they could have faith in their leaders. And his example in the video is he's talking about, you see the picture behind him, the building looks dilapidated. They got money from the EU to basically repaint most of the buildings in that city, and they just beautified. And he said he realized something was happening when he was walking down that street behind him, and he saw a shop owner pulling the metal burglar bars off his window. And he asked him why he was doing that. The shop owner told him, "This is safe now. We have a community here. People are out in the streets, they're talking, and we can walk and interact, and we feel safe now." And he did it, according to his video, just by paint, just by beautification. All right, so we've talked about, in that crime triangle, we talked about location, just what you can do to beautify or maintain a location and its impact psychologically on the community, from the fear of crime, and on the perpetrators of crime. Let's talk about the other two components real quick. The victims and the suspects here. I just lumped it under society. Does anybody recognize this quote? It's from Christmas Carol, and Charles Dickens wrote The Christmas Carol about the same time that they were doing the reforms with policing in London. So the Industrial Revolution is kicking off, society is becoming modernized, and all the ills that we see in current society are starting to manifest themselves in London at the time. Charles Dickens writes this story, and he talks about two things: ignorance and want, ignorance and poverty. The reason I put this in here, it struck me when I read it. I really liked the author and the story, but I was talking to a professor at San Francisco State University about crime and society, and his quote to me, and it was kind of shocking, I wrote it down. He said, "Police do not control crime." He said that crime results from societal conditions which are beyond the control of law enforcement agencies, and that law enforcement agencies should not take credit for crime reduction, and that we will not have to accept responsibility for resulting increases in crime. To me, that kind of was irreverent, blasphemy, because I just wasn't buying that. So if we operate on that theory that police can't do it alone, then I've got to believe that Sir Robert Peel was right, and that to keep a community safe, it's a joint effort between the police and the community to do so. I'm going to bore you with one last philosopher. This is Emil Durkheim, and he, at the same time, 1897, he's a little later than the first two, Robert Peel, Charles Dickens, but he talks about breakdown in society norms as a result of modernization and industrialization. He established social sciences, and he's the father of sociology. But he describes the breakdown of social norms and how they give rise to crime. That same breakdown is described in the broken windows theory, about how a neighborhood can degrade, how social norms break down, and then the resulting crime. So here's the city of Hutto. I think you saw this, Dwayne, and I think you saw this, Suzanne. What police look at are these small numbers, these small bar graphs that actually have to do with reportable criminal offenses. When I look at it, I saw something that was very encouraging and very different. One thing that's not listed on here is the number of security checks that the Hutto police officers do for the community. To put a security check in place, there has to be a dialogue between the police department and members of the community. The security checks, the top of the graph is 450, the bottom is 0. We did 2,127 security checks last year. To me, that's just phenomenal. That we're out in the community responding to citizens' requests to do security checks. The other thing that struck me was, there's a couple graphs over here. This one says suspicious person calls, and this one says suspicious vehicle calls. That those graphs, aside from the security checks, and the tallest one over there is traffic accidents, traffic response, gave me the impression that the community standards in Hutto are very high. The total there of suspicious person calls was 316, suspicious vehicle calls was 130, public service calls where the citizens call in and ask us to speak with us was 240, and the total for those categories was 686. We discussed that when I first got here. Just that number shows me that there's a strong level of communication between the Hutto Police Department and the citizens of Hutto, which is good in terms of public safety. So we're still talking about our victims and our suspects. Can you all read that? It's kind of small. This is non-governmental organizations. These are all the nonprofits, the church groups, and all the organizations that operate that are not under the government umbrella but operate in the community. Volunteer organizations. I'll give you a quote from Margaret Mead in regards to volunteer groups. Her quote was, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." In terms of volunteers in the U.S. history, we have a history of volunteerism. And the number of non-governmental organizations operating in the United States is estimated at 1.5 million. By comparison, our closest competitor is Russia with 277,000, 18% of what we have. So America has a resource, Texas has resources, the city of Hutto has resources to help us deal with issues that give rise to crime, fear of crime, disorder, and decay. The only example that I can give to you is peacekeeping operations in Bosnia. We see the same thing here in terms of law enforcement, is that we can go out, we can respond to issues in the community, but our resources for responding are limited to law enforcement. That there has to be something to bridge the gap between what we see as law enforcement, school districts not here, but some of the issues that are seen in the school district, and how can we get help to those to address the issues that give rise to disorder, decay, and crime. What does this look like in Hutto? I'll just say this is the symbol for Hutto Has Heart. That's a group of organizations that have banded together to address community concerns and needs, and that they do so in the interest of community welfare and existence. When we talk about that in the police department, our tip of the spear, our action agent is Officer Glass as a community resource officer. as the patrol officers find things in the community that require resources that are beyond the control of the police department, we're reaching out to Hutto Has Heart, all those non-governmental organizations to provide resources and bring it to bear on the problem. Examples recent, there's a fire up in Hutto Park. We had a member of the group respond out there and just have resources available to help if there is need to provide clothing, food, or any other issues that the family experienced. And kind of highlight you, Scott, when you go into the incident command system, there's a phase in there where you talk about restoring society. And my thought here is that we have the resources within the city of Hutto to begin that process for ourselves. If we can just pool those resources together and work through police, fire, public safety, and the schools to address the needs, or to identify the needs and have the resources to address those needs. Which brings us back to the org chart and the community resource officer. These are the functions of the community resource officer. Establish partnership with businesses, community organizations, and citizens. Identify and address crime, fear of crime, disorder, and decay issues in the community. I highlighted that the police tend to focus on just the crime issues. The public focuses on their fear of crime, and that the partnership that we have with code enforcement helps us to address disorder and decay issues in the community. And maintaining those standards keeps the standards up, keeps the opportunity for crime low. And she also serves as the department's problem-oriented policing advocate for the community. So as the community identifies problems, she'll put in the research, help us devise responses, and we'll put those in play to see if we can address the issue. Brings us back to Robert Peel's principle number 7. Police are the public are the police, and if we want to fight crime, we have to do it collectively. Any questions? That was an easy one. And I'm glad that I didn't have to tase anyone.
Don't tase me, bro.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Real quick, does anybody have anything for the good of the community they just want to announce or something? No? I want to thank everybody for coming, and we'll see y'all next month. Same time, same place.